It's now live.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee. Welcome to visitors and welcome to members. I have apologies from councillors Ian Moody and Mike Hewson, and having given due notice, Councillor Michael Muir will be substituting for Councillor Ian Moody. Good evening, Mr. Muir, and thank you. Are there any further apologies? No, in that case, I'll move on to item 2, which is notification of other business. We have none. Item 3 is chair's announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on ModGov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and the speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. Now, to clarify matters for the registered speakers, members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers. That is 5 minutes for objectors and 5 minutes for supporters. This 5-minute time limit also applies to member advocates. Please note that I have agreed to allow 10 minutes for each group of speakers on item 5. Public participation. Can I confirm the following registered speakers are in attendance? Neil Dodds, Elisa MacDonald, Councillor Claire Strong, Robert Moore, Simon Hosking, Councillor Elizabeth Dennis Harburg, Jerry Carlisle, Councillor Gerald Morris, John Ridge, John Skerr, Dan Burden, and Matt Corcoran. Matt? He's in the other room. Okay. Therefore, I'll move on to 5, which is land north of the Pound Farm, London Road, St Hippolyte's, Herts. Sean Greaves to present. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Chair, members. There is an update. You should have had a sheet setting out the update. Please say if you haven't, so that I don't have to read all of it out. Basically, the update relates to the primary education contribution that's referenced at paragraph 3.3 and 5.4.104 of the report. And there's a typographical error with regards to the amount. It's a modest difference. The contribution towards primary school and nursery provision should be £859,510 and not £859,838. And I'd like to point out that those figures for the that contribution and others to the County Council would be index linked. Also, the County Council have requested that the matter of fire hydrants not be dealt with in the Section 106 agreement, which is referred to in the table at 5.4.104, but as a condition. And I've set out a suggested condition that deals with fire hydrants in the update. Unless you want me to, I won't read out the wording of the condition, but there's no it's appropriate and acceptable to deal with the fire hydrant provision by condition instead of the Section 106 agreement. Thank you. So I'd just like to move on to the presentation of the slides. Could I have slide 1, please? Next slide, please. The site lies to the southeast of Hitchin, on the edge of Hitchin, and as you can see from that slide, there's housing development to the north and to the northwest. Pound Farm, and there's a number of residential units along with a listed building further to the south, lies to the south of the site, and to the east there is woodland with Ippolit's Brook running through that woodland to the east. Next slide, please. The site is actually allocated in the local plan allocation HT2 for 84 homes. And this is an illustrative layout of the whole site. Next slide, please. This is a hybrid application. Well, that means that part of the application seeks full planning permission and part of the application seeks outline planning permission. And on this slide, it shows the areas that have been washed over. Those are the areas that for which outline planning permission is sought, and therefore things like landscaping and layout and scale are not sought at this time, they're reserved. But the areas of that site that aren't washed over, which includes the housing to the front of the site, which is to the west. The orientation on this site is a little different insofar as north is to the left of the plan. So just bear that in mind. Full planning permission is being sought for the housing to the front of the site, the spine road running through the site, a square in the middle, and the open space, which includes a play area and a suds area, pond, a dry pond that will be dry almost all the time, apart from in the event of a 1 in 100 year flood event. That pond would be would have water in it. Almost all the time it would be dry. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of the site taken from the existing field entrance onto London Road. Next slide, please. And that is a footpath that runs along the northern edge of the site between the 1980s housing to the north, and you can see that housing to the left beyond the close bordered fencing, and the application site, which you can just see the field to the right of that photograph, and that footpath runs along the outer edge of the housing development, and there's also landscaping between that footpath and the application site. The site is a single field. Next slide, please. And that's the view taken from next to that footpath to the north that looks across the site to the southeast. And if you've got good eyesight, you can see some Ippolit's Church popping out of the woodland in the right-hand corner of that slide. And that's looking towards the woodland to the east, which is to the left of that slide, and the landscaping along the southern boundary to that single field. Next slide, please. This is the housing development to the north of the site, and you can see that footpath again running along there with housing to the left. Next slide, please. This is an existing open space to the northeast of the site, and to the right of this is looking southeast. And to the right of that photograph is the eastern boundary of the application site with the post and wire fence. Next slide, please. This is the housing development at Pound Farm, which lies to the southwest of the site. You can't see the actual listed Pound Farm house, but that's beyond those houses, which are new build and conversions to that look like converted barns. Next slide, please. This photograph is taken at Pound Farm, looking north along London Road. And as you can see from this, you can actually see the application site, which is over the brow of that hill, heading north. Next slide, please. This is at the junction of Mill Lane and London Road, and Mill Lane is opposite the appeal site. And improvements to that junction are proposed as part of this application. Next slide, please. And this is the established housing development on the opposite side of London Road, to the northwest of the application site. And you can see there a sign that says Hitching as you approach into Hitching, and a roundabout, sign for a roundabout. Next slide, please. These are cross sections of the site, and whilst the site is relatively level, there's a gentle slope going down towards the brook to the east, and that those slides to the bottom indicate that general slope of the site. Next slide, please. And once again, this is a cross section, and that shows the frontage to London Road. Next slide, please. These are examples of houses within the development. These are houses to the southwestern corner of the site, which will be close to those barns and dwellings that look like converted barns to that southwestern corner of the site. Next slide, please. That's an example of one of the small blocks of flats, which is towards the northern end of the site, close to the existing housing development to the north. Next slide, please. Right, so these were not submitted as part of the application, these CGIs, but have been provided by the applicant to illustrate what the development would look like to assist committee members in seeing what the development will appear as. And this is an aerial view of the site, and you can see the proposed new roundabout, the junction with London Road. Originally, in pre-application, there's been extensive pre-application consultations on this application, and originally it was proposed to have a standard junction with London Road, but at the request of the St Ibbot's Parish Council, what is called a compact roundabout is now proposed by the applicant. The applicant agreed to amend the scheme to address the comments of the Parish Council, and that would have the benefit of also not only providing safe access to the site, but traffic calming, slowing down traffic along London Road. Next slide, please. This is a view along London Road. Two bus shelters are proposed on London Road outside the site to enable easier access to the existing public transport that runs along London Road. And that view to the left is the proposed frontage onto London Road. Next slide, please. This is a view from the south of the proposed roundabout looking towards the housing development, and to the right, that will be the spine road into the application site. Next, please, next slide. This is a view along that spine road looking east of the proposed housing development. And you can see from that slide the proposed mix of materials that are proposed as part of the scheme. To the right, there's some weatherboarding, and you've got brick and traditional tiled roofs proposed as part of the development, and differences in surface treatment on the road. Next slide, please. This is the central village square, if you want to call it that. It's a central square of open space fronted by housing development. Next slide, please. And this is the amenity open space, and that shows the suds area. It's dry, and it's a relatively shallow area where water would be stored at extreme flood events. Next slide, please. And that's a view from the south of, so it's from the east of the site, and the proposed amenity area. Next slide, please. I think that's all. And that's the final slide showing the view from the adjacent field to the south of the site. Next slide, please. I think that's the last one. Yes, that's the last one. The applicants did provide a fly-through of it, which basically would maneuver through the site, but I'm told that the system can't cope with that, I'm afraid. So that's the end of the slideshow in terms of trying to illustrate to members what the development would look like. As the emerging local plan has yet to be adopted, this is an allocated site in the local plan, allocated site HT2. The site currently lies within the Greenbelt, and therefore the proposed development is inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. However, the applicant has put forward a case that there are very special circumstances that clearly outweighed the harm to the Greenbelt by reason of inappropriate and any other harm. And Greenbelt policy is addressed in detail in the report, and the report does set out in detail why it's considered by officers that there are indeed very special circumstances in this case to justify the proposed development in the Greenbelt. It is considered that it would not be premature of members to consider this development in advance of the adoption of the local plan, principally because of the relatively modest scale of the development. The National Planning Policy Framework indicates that refusal of planning permission on grounds of prematurity, that is on grounds where we're awaiting the adoption of the local plan, would very rarely be a justifiable reason for refusal, especially in cases such as this, where the housing scheme is relatively modest within the scale of the local plan as a whole. And so the framework does not suggest that prematurity should be a reason for refusal in cases where you have schemes of this scale. It is relatively modest in terms of the district as a whole, but would make a good contribution to the local housing land supply. And as members are aware, the council currently only has a 1.47 years supply of housing, which is substantially short of the required 5-year supply set out by the government. And therefore, given that it's considered that the proposal would not conflict with Greenbelt policy, the tilted balance in favour of the proposal does apply, and it's considered that proposed development would be a sustainable form of development in this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Members, have you any questions of Sean at this time? Councillor Ian Mantle.
Thank you. Just a technical point. One of the earlier slides, you showed the footpath alongside the northern end of the site, and then a couple of rows of trees. Are those trees to be retained or to be removed?
Those trees are outside the site, and they would be retained.
Thank you.
Could I just ask about this section in your report about the resolution for grants? Could you explain what that means and what the implications are? Thank you.
There is a national order that basically, a government order that basically says for applications in the Greenbelt that are over a certain size, and that size in terms of built form is 1,000 square metres, and therefore this exceeds that threshold. The application should be referred to the Secretary of State for the Secretary of State to consider whether he wishes to call in the application. It's a process that has to be gone through. It is relatively rare that applications of this scale are called in by the Secretary of State, but that's for the Secretary of State to determine as to whether he wants to call it in to determine the application. So if you're minded to approve planning permission, obviously if you're not minded to approve it and are minded to refuse it, then you would not have to refer it to the Secretary of State. But if you're minded to recommend approval or approve this application, then a reference is required to the Secretary of State, who will have around about 4 weeks, I believe, to come back to us as to whether he wants to take it on or the application be approved.
I have a question, and that's reference the notes about schools under the 106 agreements. Can you explain to the members what the county council's position is, or do we have somebody from the county council to explain it?
Yes, Chair. The County Council are the education authority, obviously, and it's for them to determine how the money is spent. The applicants have agreed to offer the contribution that's been sought towards education, both primary and secondary. And this is a matter for the education authority then, for the County Council to determine how that money should be spent in terms of mitigating the impacts of this development. I believe that there are representatives of the County Council that are available online, and if you have, and they may be able to give more detail as to their approach to the financial contributions that are being offered by the applicant and the spending of it on, which they're proposing to spend on the 2FE primary school at Highover Farm in north of Hitchin.
Thank you. Perhaps we'll be able to call on those later. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, I'll now go on to registered speakers. I'm allowing an extra 5 minutes, so it's 10 minutes for both the supporters and the objectors. So can I first welcome Neil Dodds and Alyssa MacDonald, who are sharing the 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing us this extra time. In fact, we've cut down, or I certainly cut down my contribution a bit to try and achieve the 5 minutes, so may not use all of it, probably won't. Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Hitchin Forum, an amenity group which has about 100 members. Previously, Hitchin Forum noted significant local concerns, including overloaded sewage infrastructure, high surface water levels, closure of the gap between Hitchin and St Hippolyte's, and access problems onto and from the B656 London Road. In response to the present planning application, Hitchin Forum wrote, "We consider the promotion of this land for development to be premature. The land concerned is Greenbelt under the current adopted local plan, and we note that the government inspector reviewing the proposed updating of the local plan has expressed concern about housing numbers required and use of Greenbelt land to provide for them. And we wrote, we note the local concern about additional traffic, and to offset this, we would wish to see traffic calming measures and cycle and pedestrian provision, including for crossing the roads up at the 3 Moorhens roundabout, which anybody walking from the site would have to cross over to get into town." Regarding the Greenbelt, I note what Mr. Greaves has said, and this is what we've got down. As noted, the site is located within the Greenbelt in the current adopted local plan. Paragraph 137 of the National Planning Policy Framework states that the fundamental aim of Greenbelt policy is to prevent urban sprawl, and the essential characteristics of Greenbelts are their openness and their permanence, and also that inappropriate development within the Greenbelt should only be approved in very special circumstances. A small number of exceptions is set out in paragraphs 149 and 150 of the framework. And we believe that the proposed development doesn't fit any of the exceptions listed. And so this would represent inappropriate development. Now, turning to the surrounding area, if I could just widen it a bit. South of this site is another proposed development in the Greenbelt, Waterdale Lane, involving 52 dwellings and also accessed from the B656. And not much further south is NHC's proposed safeguarded land in the Greenbelt, involving up to 3,100 dwellings, which will link up with Stevenage's 1,500 home western expansion. And taken together with this proposal, it will involve a great increase in development of the area, resulting in loss of Greenbelt, loss of character, urban sprawl, traffic congestion, and stresses on water supply and wastewater treatment. And looking north, there are many other sites being proposed in the green belt in and around Hitchin, which will further increase the total number of dwellings involved by over 1,000. That concludes my contribution.
Thank you, Neil. Elisa.
Good evening. My name's Alyssa MacDonald and I live in St Hippolyts. I was born in the area, lived away as many people do, and then brought my family back here 9 years ago. I like to raise some questions. And the first question I'd like to raise is, what's the real cost of this development when we're facing a climate emergency, to the council, to the environment and to North Herts? Neil's talked about the impact of building on Greenbelt, and with reference to this site, I would like to raise a number of issues. Groundwater. The Environmental Agency predict rivers to be 30% higher in winter, causing flooding, and perhaps even more significantly, 80% drier in the summer by 2050. Hertfordshire has been identified by the Environmental Agency as the driest county in England. There will be significant challenges as it stands to meet water demand, compounded by the more houses we build. Specific to this area, groundwater supplies up to 70% of fresh drinking water. Please can we make sure that the impact on groundwater is addressed before a planning decision is made? Flooding. The lead local flood authority had until recently many objections to the development, and our local MP, Bim Afalami, thought that councillors should not approve development while these objections remained. These objections have now become conditions that the lead local flood authority asked to be met, some before any development takes place. For example, I quote, "No development until the final design of the drainage scheme is completed and sent to the local planning authority for approval." They also asked to be notified for their records should there be any subsequent surface water flooding that they may be required to investigate as a result of the new development. Issues of sewerage do not seem to be addressed either. The planning application seems to suggest that the proposed development would connect with the current sewerage system. This, as many residents of Broadmeadow will testify, has had problems, both with blockages and the occasional leak into the St Hippolyts Brook, which, as you saw in the presentation, runs alongside the proposed development. How will it cope with more demand? Will there be more leaks of sewage into the brook? And if so, what will the impact be on the ecosystem and on local residents? A different matter now, I turn to disability. The proposed dwellings are varied in size, but has full consideration been given to the suitability of the dwellings for disabled members of our community, particularly those with mobility issues and wheelchair users? This is a material concern and needs to be addressed. Education. It's noted that the 106 funding to go to Hitchin schools, currently marked for High Over Farm and the Priory, are both over 2 miles from the site. This seems inappropriate and will lead to more transport, more cars on the road. Moreover, currently there are a number of children from Broadmeadow and further into St Hippolyts and Gosmore who cannot obtain a place at their nearest local school, both secondary and primary. A further 84 dwellings will compound this and make it extremely unlikely that a child from the centre of St Hippolyts village will get into a secondary Hitchin school at all, as the main village is further away from Hitchin than the proposed new development. Pollution. The 3 Moorhens roundabout, which, as Neil said, will be the main way into Hitchin, has been identified as a pollution black spot. So I ask you again, what's the real cost? I have raised questions and I ask you to object to this application, or at least defer a decision until some of the questions that I have raised can be answered. Please consider, if we keep building and building on Greenbelt, we will be able to look our children and our grandchildren in the eye when they tell us what the real cost was. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. Members, have you any questions of clarification of either Neil or Elisa? No, you got off very lightly. Can I now call upon Councillor Claire Strong, who is speaking as a member advocate. Good evening, Claire.
Chairman, I thought I went after those that are speaking in favour of the application at the end of all the public participation. That's the terms of process.
Well, you can do, but on my list, you speak now. Would you prefer to speak at the end?
I'd like to speak at the end. I'd like to listen to the parish council representative and those speaking in favour first, if that would be all right.
Yeah,
please,
fine, Claire.
Thank you.
I therefore now call upon Robert Moore and Simon Hoskin, who will be sharing 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for allowing me to speak ahead of Councillor Claire Strong. Chairman, members of the Planning Committee and officers of the Council, thank you very much indeed for this opportunity to address you in support of what we consider overall to be an excellent planning application. My name is Robert Moore, St Hippolyte's Parish Councillor, representing the Southern Rural Ward in which this application site falls. Also, as Secretary of the Neighbourhood Development Plan Steering Group, we have actively engaged with this applicant over several years, during which time we have genuinely secured meaningful improvements across several aspects of the development. Some of those have been touched on by Officer Sean Greaves, particularly with regard to design, highway safety improvements, and what is soon to be hoped, new affordable homes for the first time within this parish for over 15 years. I would also just like to thank County Councillor Richard Fake and former Area Planning Officer Tom Ray for their valuable advice in seeking improvements, particularly with regard to the design of the roundabout and the highway safety improvements that will undoubtedly bring. We have also worked closely with other officers at North Herts Council to ensure that progress on the St Hippolyte's Neighbourhood Development Plan is in conformity with the emerging local plan. Part of that process involved a comprehensive parish-wide consultation with residents, some of whom, as you will have heard tonight, had genuine concerns, particularly with regard to increased pressure on local services. As this excellent report before you confirms, however, of those who responded to our questionnaire, a sizable majority expressed support for new housing development here at the Poundfield Farm site. That said, I am certain some of that indicated support was only as a direct result of the genuine expectation our parish as a whole would benefit from future Section 106 contributions, particularly towards the much needed expansion of St Hippolyte's Primary School. And I would also like to thank Alicia for mentioning that in her presentation to you. Ultimately, of course, all Section 106 monies are paid for in the purchase price by new occupiers. Consequently, those new occupiers, wherever possible, will be, and rightly so, fully expecting to be able to send their children to St Hippolyte's Primary School. Today, I have already written to you all, except I must apologise to Councillor Michael Muir, who I did not know was substituting tonight. But I can let you have the papers that I've sent to the other members afterwards. I've written to you in greater detail, principally on behalf of the headmistress and the head of school governors, to explain that our precious primary school, as configured, should only be accommodating up to 140 pupils, whereas in fact the school is currently providing excellent education for 176 children. 3 bulge years and counting, plus the pressure from new development within our beautiful parish. Even Herts County Council recognises the need for some expansion at St Hippolyte's Primary School. However, whilst overall I fully endorse this excellent report prepared by your officers, I cannot in all consciousness sit by when asking for your support for much needed new development. But when doing so, as the application is to be reported to the Secretary of State, please can we ensure the draft Section 106 agreement allows and allocates primary school contributions to St Hippolyte's Primary School where they are fully justified and relate to this Poundfield site in St Hippolyte's. Remember, the future development of Hiver Farm and the enormous increase in land values will be more than sufficient to fully fund a new primary school over on the far side of Hitching. Added to which the cascade effect referred to in the responses from Herts County Council will be even more effective if the early delivery of a new classroom at St Hippolyt's Primary School is achieved first. Further, and if I could ask you to turn to page 83 of this report.
You have a minute left, so that Simon can speak.
The secondary school education referred to on page 83 proposes to share or an alternative of a Hiver Farm school or another secondary school in Lichfield. Logically, morally and practically, absolutely the right thing to do is to ensure that primary school contributions from a St Hippolyt's site are first directed where most needed towards St Hippolyt's Primary School. All of us stand for election primarily in order to be able to help our constituents. In this instance, St Hippolyt's Primary School needs and deserves your support, and I, on behalf of St Hippolyt's Parish Council, am very grateful for your time listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Simon, can I ask you to?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair and Committee, for allowing me to address the committee. I'm the planning agent and speaking on behalf of the applicant, Osprey Homes, an award-winning Hertfordshire-based house builder. We support your officer's recommendation of approval. The site has been allocated for residential development in your emerging local plan and is referred to as Site HT2. It is expected to make an important and early contribution to meeting the urgent need for new housing in the district. The emerging local plan is at an advanced stage and close to adoption, and therefore should be afforded significant weight in accordance with paragraph 48 of the National Planning Policy Framework. The proposal seeks for up to 84 new homes, which is in line with the dwelling estimates referred to within policy HT2. Osprey Homes has been working closely with the North Hertfordshire District Council planning team on this application, as well as local stakeholders, including St Hippolyt's Parish Council. Amendments have been made to the scheme to positively respond to feedback received from officers and the local community, and these have included the provision of a roundabout on London Road at the entrance to the site. The proposed developments will also deliver substantial benefits, which include affordable housing of a mix and type, which has been agreed with North Herts District Council's housing officer, highways improvements through the provision of speed calming measures in addition to the roundabout, new bus stops immediately outside the site, and improvements to the junction where Mill Lane meets London Road, as well as other community benefits through provision for local services and facilities by way of Section 106 contributions totaling just over £2 million, and which includes a contribution towards a new sports pavilion at the St Hippolyt's Recreation Ground. The design and layout of the proposed development has been carefully considered to ensure that the policy requirements for the site as set out in policy HT2, apologies, I'm not sure what's going on with the microphone, of the emerging local plan will be met. The scheme will benefit from adequate on-site parking provision, well-designed amenity and open space, and will present a strong sense of identity through its carefully considered design. In terms of traffic generation, the proposal has been considered in line with TRICS calculations, which can model the anticipated levels. And based on those calculations, which have been agreed with Hertfordshire County Council as part of the scoping and pre-application discussions, it has been found that it would not have significant levels of, would not result in significant levels of traffic generation. So for these reasons, Chair, we fully support your officer's recommendation of approval. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee.
Thank you, Simon. Members, have you any questions of clarification for Robert or Simon? Councillor Michael Muir.
I'd like to ask a question of clarification to the parish councillor. County says that 500 houses is equal to one form of entry. we've got 84 houses in this application, which is just under a fifth of a form of entry. Can you tell me, please, as I know St Iplit's, but being a Baldock councillor, I've never seen what's in the plan for St Iplit's. So can you tell me, please, how many other houses are in the local plan which might be adopted by the inspector, so that I can work out how many students will be missing their education in St Iplit's and will be bused to Hitchin. So if you can tell me how many extra houses that could be built in the future.
Chair, if I may have to ask Sean Grieve for some help on that one. There are 3 nominated sites within the local plan, totaling about 160 houses, plus approximately another 100 or so houses are identified as infill and windfall. Some are under construction, some are now occupied, and some are in the planning process. Overall, my objective is to make sure that contributions that have been identified as needed by Herts County Council for primary school education in the whole Hitchin area are targeted in the most efficient way. Our view as a parish council is that where St Iplit's is already 36 pupils over its built capacity and has been asked at 3 occasions to take bulge years, including 27 over a PANS number of 20 in September last year, we think it's vital, and the school governor and the head mistress have prepared an excellent report explaining that this mixed age group problem, that if that's the right word, that they are experiencing. There are some children who are being held back by sharing education facilities with younger children who are taking more time to catch up. And the ideal for St Iplit's, and Herts County Council welcome this opportunity, is to provide an additional classroom. It's not an extra form entry. County Council argued quite rightly, in my view, that the cascade effect of providing additional primary school places within the Hitchin education area will have a beneficial effect overall. We find it slightly troublesome that the idea that a whole 2-form entry new school, as yet unbuilt, unpermissioned in the Greenbelt, should be prioritised ahead of a very modest extension at St Iplit's Primary School, where there's clear and proven need for an excellent and highly regarded school, whereas High Over Farm may take many, many years before it actually comes on stream. And then if it does, if we don't build an extension at St Iplit's Primary School, parents who are in sight of the church and the school will be forced to drive twice daily across Hitchin to take their new children to a proposed, bearing in mind it's only proposed, large 2-form entry school on the other side of Hitchin. And also, if I may add, this won't prejudice the opportunity for Herts County Council. The additional land value of a 400 home site, if it's granted by your committee, plus all the financial contributions and primary school contributions, and any sale of existing school facilities, will give massive opportunities for Herts County Council to deliver both. So, Mr. Muir, in answer to your question, we think that the priority should be St Iplit's Primary School, which is effectively new homeowners in St Iplit's will be funding first and foremost, if you wouldn't mind.
Excellent report.
Thank you, Robert. But you must realise, of course, that NHDC and certainly this committee cannot make decisions on behalf of Hertfordshire County Council. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that was precisely why I referred you to page 83 of the report, where in another item tonight, the secondary education sought by Herts County Council proposes, before indexation, towards the expansion of the primary school, so that's an existing school, in Hitchin, or another unnamed secondary school in lecture. So the proposition before you isn't an either or in our view. They're recognising that whichever they feel will come on stream first and is most practical to deliver is where they want to go. For St Hippolyte's, we cannot understand the priority to wait until a new 2-form entry school is built in Highover Farm, if that ever happens, before they'll even consider bringing forward a proposal for a relatively modest extension at St Hippolyte's. 800,000 won't really touch the new large school at Highover Farm. It will be an absolute godsend for St Hippolyte's Primary School.
Thank you. If members are minded, perhaps we ought to make a recommendation that some priority is given to St Hippolyte's Primary School. Oh, no. Were there any more questions for Robert or Simon before I go over to Councillor Claire Strong? Councillor Tony Hunter.
I'll use the old method, Chairman. It seems to work. I mean, that's been pressed for ages now. Twofold. One, I've got a question of the developer, and two, I have a request. Now, obviously, the request I'll mention first as to whether it's possible. The question of education is coming up an awful lot and being discussed. You mentioned earlier that within the wings or online, we had representatives from Herts County Council that could advise us as far as education is concerned. I mean, I've read all the reports and the accompanying documents, and there's an awful lot of them. And in there somewhere, it says there's already a scheme proposed for St Hippolyte's. Now, whether that's on the back burner or whether it's going to happen, it's not clear within what I've read. So I would like to know, and I'm sure the committee would like to know, as to, obviously, county are the experts. They do all the summing up, working out, and it's quite an involved formula. I was a county councillor for 12 years. I know they don't often get it wrong. They work through everything, every piece of information they can think of to arrive at conclusions, especially with 106 money. That's the request, Chairman. The question of the developer was, it's cropped up quite often, and it does crop up again and again with major developments about the drainage and sewerage. Now, obviously, this is quite a large development going into probably an existing system. I want assurance from the developer that they've spoken to the water authority and all the necessary people to know that it can actually happen, because there has been development across the district whereby it hasn't, and it's presented problems at a later date. Thank you, Chairman. And I'll be quiet.
Simon, would you like to answer that?
And thank you, Councillor, for the question. In relation to sewerage, there is an actual statutory duty for sewerage undertakers to provide capacity to deal with new housing. The developer, Osprey Homes, has been in contact, has had pre-application discussions with the sewerage undertakers, and we understand that they are aware of capacity issues. And obviously, as I say, it will be there up to them to make sure that adequate capacity is provided for.
Councillor Claire Strong, do you want to speak now, or do you want me to try and get hold of Hertfordshire County Council to explain the policy reference schools?
Chairman, I'd quite like to dip in now, and then again, some of the questions I have, which I think are educationally based, which I think Herts County Council representation could perhaps also help, and also give it by means of explanation. But I mean, what I really wanted to say was that I'd really like to thank the officers for all the work that they've actually done on bringing this application forward now. They've worked, I think, probably tirelessly with the parish council and also the developer to bring something together that actually it's always, for me, quite refreshing when a parish council comes forward and is very positive about the plan and the development, because they worked so hard together, all three parties, to get it right and acceptable, except that there is this issue now that you've heard tonight about the Section 106 money and for the education. I mean, as all the members of the committee know, on the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 56, that planning conditions should be kept to a minimum and imposed where they're necessary, relevant to the planning. And obviously in this case, this is a large development, so it is necessary that the educational needs of those that are going to be occupying these dwellings are looked after. But the government planning guidance, it does say that the decision makers should consider existing or planned committed school capacity and whether it is sufficient to accommodate proposed development within the relevant school place planning areas. Now, here we have a school that is in this planning area, but this school is full. And as you've heard, the numbers are squeezing pupils into the school. And it very much needs some further capacity if it's going to be able to give that capacity to the children in the village. And it's not just for the children on this development. As you've heard, there's other developments that are in and around St Hippolyte that's going to increase that pressure onto that school. It also says in the government guidance that developers' contribution towards the additional capacity may be required, and if this is a requirement, it should be set out in the plan, which has come forward. And plan makers should also consider whether pupils from planned development are likely to attend schools outside the planned area and whether developer contributions may be required to expand schools outside the area. But why do we need to be looking to schools that are not even built? The pros money that's going to go to Highover Farm. This is a school that is not even, I don't think we've seen any plan coming in at all yet of a new school. When the parents that are going to be buying these houses undoubtedly want to send their children, and these are young children, why would they want to be sending their children outside the village? It's important that children, particularly when they're young, they go to school within their village so that they can meet, socialise, and that with those that are in their village. And they shouldn't need to be having parents that are going to take them in a car ride across either to this new school or some of the other schools that are in Hitchin. If all the things that we want to do about saving the environment, keeping parents out of their cars, taking them to schools is one of the things I think we should be looking at as an authority. And I've always understood that the planning obligations that were entered into are to mitigate those of the development and not to benefit in another area. So my question really is to, if we have got a representative from Herts County Council, is why are they proposing that the Section 106 money that the developer is putting forward for education, why it is not going to be benefiting the children that are going to be living in this new development that's attached to St Hippolyte's, and it's going to be part of the St Hippolyte's school that is there, which would love to have the money. And the amount of money that's proposed, it could do so much to that school, so much for the children in that development. So that's my plea to you, Chairman, and to the members of the committee, is to really look hard on what you're asking when you're determining this application, particularly around that 106, and to really try and find out from county why they are not going to be, they're not listening to the parish or to the new population that are going to be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Is it Mr. Preston from County Council? Good evening, sir. Welcome to this meeting. You've most probably heard. Excuse me one moment. Yes, Councillor Muir.
Seeing I'm a county councillor, can I take some advice? Seeing it's not a council application for the houses.
Are you on the education committee?
Am I all right to speak on behalf of extra places in the school? I'd just like to confirm that I'm all right.
Are you on the education committee at county?
I'm afraid I am.
Then you can't. I'm sorry.
Sorry?
Then you can't.
Okay, thank you.
Back to the representative of HCC. Very sorry to interrupt you there.
That's okay, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you clearly.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Anthony Poietti. I'm a team leader in the Growth and Infrastructure Unit at the County Council. So I'm not necessarily an education expert, but I do have some knowledge and have been conversing with my education colleagues. So I will endeavour to answer the questions and address the points which have come up. So I think the first one is, and probably where the bone of contention is that despite its geographical proximity to St Hippolyt's, this development sits within the Hitchin primary planning area. So therefore, when we're talking about the area that it is sitting in and capacity of that area, the County Council is not looking at St Hippolyt's because this site, despite its geographical proximity, in planning terms, doesn't sit within St Hippolyt's, it sits within the Hitchin primary planning area. So I think that that's a point of clarification, and that was pointed out in the officers' committee report as well. So looking at Hitchin, the County Council's strategy for mitigating the development in Hitchin is the priority will be the new Turfey Primary School at Highover Farm. And we feel that is a necessary project to come forward as a priority to ensure that that project is fully funded and fully deliverable. A strategy of expanding lots of existing schools before doing that may well leave that new school as being unfunded and undeliverable, and ultimately may end up with there not being enough capacity in its totality for Hitchin. Even if we considered that the contributions from this development should go to St Hippolyt's, my understanding is that the proposed St Hippolyt's expansion is only a 0.3 FE expansion. And I think that's been borne out by some of the conversations when they were talking about the number of classrooms to be expanded, that it wasn't, a full 1 FE expansion. There's been a number of existing developments that have already come forward in St Hippolyt's for which contributions have already been sought towards that project. Taking into account the yield arising from those developments already coming forward, they amount to approximately 0.23 of an FE. So that means that there's only about 0.07 FE's worth of capacity of that expansion project for which contributions could be sought from this development or from any other developments. So if there was such a strong desire that monies were to go to the St Hippolyt's expansion, we're not looking at £859,000 because that's the full amount of yield arising. We're actually looking at, and that's for a new school cost, we'd have to look at expansion costs, which are roughly 717k, and we'd be looking at about a third of them. So the contributions in total, and this is roughly speaking, I'd have to go away and do the actual calculations, but we'd be looking at contributions towards that expansion project of about 240k. That would then mean that that expansion project is full of pupils, and therefore, we are governed under community infrastructure levy regulations when seeking these Section 106 financial contributions and the statutory tests. That would mean that we wouldn't be able to seek any more contributions towards that project for any other developments that come forward in St Hippolyt's or, on the boundary of the St Hippolyt's and Hitchin primary planning areas. So that's kind of all of the remaining money that will kind of be going to that project. You could then also have a situation where there might be some further development in St Hippolyt's, even further south, for which the only project would be schools in Hitchin, and they would be going from potentially even further away from this site to the schools in Hitchin. So there were some other points that were made, such as almost a suggestion that we're going to be busing the children from this development or driving them to Highover Farm. That's not the case. We've clearly talked about the cascade effect of the new school at Highover Farm Hitchin being a town-wide infrastructure mitigation project. It is putting a lot of capacity into the town, which allows this cascade effect of pupils then who are currently going to other schools and cascading it so that pupils will hopefully be able to go to the schools which are closer to them. The notion of waiting for schools to be built before seeking contributions to them, the County Council doesn't have millions of pounds worth of money to forward fund projects. It is wholly appropriate to be seeking contributions in advance of infrastructure projects. And the times that has been done has been praised by central government, putting that infrastructure in first, seeking those contributions in advance. The notion that Highover Farm will be paid for all by the Highover Farm development through realising land value isn't how Section 106 contributions work. Highover Farm will be paying its relevant proportion based on the yield arising from it. It will account for, let's say, approximately 1.6 FE. So there will be additional contributions that will need to be sought in order to make that project deliverable and funded. So I'll circle back to the main point, which is this development sits within the Hitchin primary planning area. Therefore, the County Council looks at that in terms of Hitchin, despite the geographical proximity to St. Hippolyte's. And even if we were going to divert some of the funds to St. Hippolyte's, it wouldn't be that full 859k. It would be a much, much smaller proportion. And just to note the point that if there are future developments in St. Hippolyte's and they do come to committee for determination, they cannot go to St. Hippolyte's because it will be full up with children and therefore bound by the SIL regs and the Section 1, as we are seeking 106, we would not be able to seek any more towards that project. So hopefully that gives a bit of an understanding as to why the County Council has made the decisions that it has. I can fully appreciate the comments that are being made by members of the Parish Council and other members of the committee, but hopefully that gives a bit of an understanding. And I'm guessing if people have further questions, I will endeavour to answer them.
Anthony, have any members got questions or clarifications they need? Councillor Ian Mantle.
Thank you. I've got two questions. In your calculations or assessment, what weight do you give to the reduction of carbon emissions, the reduction of traffic and the encouragement of walking and cycling to get to schools? That's the first question. And the second one is I don't know the St. Hippolyte's School in detail, I'm afraid, but what is it actually physically possible to provide on the site which the school currently occupies?
Okay, I'll take the second question first. I say I'm not an education planner, so I don't know the full details of the site. However, my understanding is that it is a constrained site. There's not the ability to expand into adjacent land, and therefore this 0.3 FE of expansion is the totality of the expansion capability of that school. And in terms of the carbon, obviously we do put high consideration on carbon, but as I say, we're not proposing that those children are going to go to necessarily Highover Farm. Highover Farm is a town-wide strategy with a cascade effect, which will free up capacity in schools so that children should hopefully be able to, and of course there's always parental preference, but children should be able to hopefully go to those schools which are closest to them. So we are not suggesting necessarily that these children will go to that new primary school at Highover Farm. It's a town-wide strategy.
Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. Couple of quick, you've answered some of the things in what you've said earlier that I was going to ask. The little point I have really here is, it says in your response to Parish Council, this will free up, Highover Farm will free up capacity in other schools between Pound Farm and Highover Farm New School, and ultimately, which is a word I'm having problems with, result in additional spare capacity in primary schools close to the Pound Farm development site, which the children from Pound Farm are most likely to attend. I wonder if you could tell me which schools that you're thinking of that are actually closer than St. Hippolyte's School and which are close to that Pound Farm site, which will have the capacity freed up if they don't have it already at the moment. Because you mentioned also in what you said there, that they could end up going to schools even further away in Hitchin and Highover Farm. I'm not sure if, but Highover Farm's about as far from this development as you can possibly get and still be in Hitchin. You can't go any further and still be in Hitchin, actually be in Letchworth in that case. So there's that little query on that. But it's this thing about ultimately, how long is it going to take for this spare capacity kind of to be made? Which schools is that capacity going to be freed up in? And are they really close on St. Hippolyte's?
Okay, second point first. So I wasn't suggesting that they will be going to schools further away from Highover Farm. What I was suggesting was that the point to be made that there's a great distance from the Pound Farm site to Highover Farm. And what I'm suggesting is that if Highover Farm takes up the remaining capacity of the St. Hippolyte's primary school expansion, then any other development in St. Hippolyte's, which I'm presuming by its nature must be south of Pound Farm, because it'll be in the St. Hippolyte's primary planning area, which if we're suggesting that Pound Farm will be going to the new school at Highover Farm, then they must be going, any development further south must be going even further. So it'll be sort of a really perverse effect. And I think the real point is that there is limited capacity for this expansion at St. Hippolyte's. So you could take up a bit of the remaining capacity with this development, but at least 2/3 of this development will not be going, the contributions will not be going to St. Hippolyte's, they're unable to go to St. Hippolyte's, and any further development in St. Hippolyte's, the 106 contributions cannot go to the St. Hippolyte's expansion project. So you wouldn't be able to raise the same arguments again for other developments, because there just wouldn't be room in that St. Hippolyte's expansion project. And in terms of schools, just having a look at my map, I mean, I can see a number of primary schools between Pound Farm and the proposed location for the Highover Farm. And so I say the cascade effect works by the fact that Highover Farm will not be taking up 100% of the capacity of that new 2 FE school. It will take up, let's say, roughly 1.6 FE. Therefore, there's 0.4 FE's worth, which will be taken up by other developments, but it will free up the capacity. There will be children potentially going to one of these other schools, or children that will be going to it, for which Highover Farm is now closer. So therefore, they'll be able to go to Highover Farm, freeing up places in the closest school. And I say it's this cascade effect whereby it frees up capacity because it's a town-wide strategy, allowing, hopefully, children that are able to go to their closest schools. So we're not saying that those children will all necessarily go to that new school at Highover Farm. It frees up the capacity in other schools.
Councillor Val Bryant.
Thank you. I appreciate you're working from a very general model, but I've been racking my brains about my knowledge about junior schools in Hitchin. And I would think that the nearest junior schools to the proposed site are Highbury, Gosmore, possibly William Ransom, to mention 3. Now, I assume that the County Council has actually got the statistics looking forward, certainly for the next 5 years, if not the next 10 years, about capacity in each of these schools. Because after all, these children who already live in Hitchin have already been born. What I think we really need is to have some real figures to be looking at rather than this hypothetical model.
Yeah, we don't look 10 years advance because the children haven't been born yet. We look at a maximum of about 4 years in advance, because then we have that GP data of the children coming forward for primary. So we do. There's the forecasts. The forecasts are readily available on the County Council's website, which show It shows what the actuals are for 2018-19, 2019 to 20, and 2020 to 21. Then factoring in, as I say, the next 4 years in terms of GP data, it gives a prediction not for the schools. It breaks it down into areas. We've got Hitchin West, Hitchin South, and Hitchin North. It breaks it down into what that capacity may be. Now, the forecasts don't necessarily take into account all the development that's proposed. It will take into account an element if it has been committed, but won't take into account development which is still to be proposed. So that would give you that hard data as such, which will show you what the situation is at the schools technically at the moment in terms of the 2020-21, and what the proposals are for groups of schools, be it Hitchin South, Hitchin West, and Hitchin North for the next 4 years.
So what we need is a knowledgeable officer to actually look at these statistics for us. And I've just got them on the website on my phone, but we do need that information and for it to be scrutinised.
Apologies, what information do you need? Sorry, I'm slightly lost what you're asking for exactly.
Just followed what you said about going onto the Hertfordshire website on my phone, got onto the page you're talking about the student equivalent places and the proposal of additional school places and so on. And I think what we need for this application is a knowledgeable officer to actually write us a report actually saying how this works out in Hitchin and the effect that these applications will have, especially as you mentioned other applications as well. Is it possible for the County Council to provide that?
I'm a slight loss as to what report you want exactly. So what we have done is we have looked at the proposed local plan and the proposed growth, because this is a plan-led system we're under, and the proposed growth for Hitchin, and assessed based on that what the mitigation projects should be. As I say, our strategy for the level of growth proposed for Hitchin and the Hitchin primary planning area is a new school at Highover Farm, and then potentially expansion projects as well within Hitchin. And the data suggests that that is a wholly relevant and appropriate strategy based on the level of growth proposed to come forward in your local plan. I'm not sure what more you kind of need from that per se.
Chair, can I do my last response? Possibly not to have to just sit here and work it out myself.
Apologies, I'm not sure what you want to work out. There shows a bit of capacity at the moment within Hitchin because, as I said, the forecasts don't cover the significant amount of development. They're almost a situation at the moment with the growth, with the demographics, so the birth data, the GP data factored in. So this is the situation. If there was no development happening in Hitchin, then we probably wouldn't be seeking any contributions because it shows there within the forecast that there's lots of, well, there's not lots, but there's relative amounts of capacity. So if there was no more development coming forward in Hitchin, we wouldn't be seeking a 106 contribution because this development, as it is within the Hitchin primary planning area, there's sufficient capacity. However, when you then layer in the X thousand amounts of new homes within Hitchin, that capacity disappears. We're not able to mitigate all the children arising from the development in the Hitchin primary planning area. We need to mitigate all of that additional yield arising in the Hitchin primary planning area. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that primarily through a new 2FE school at Highover Farm. What's happening in St. Hippolyte in some ways isn't important because it's not in the primary planning area. This site is in the Hitchin primary planning area.
Thank you, Anthony. Can I call upon Sean to respond to any of the points that have been raised?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to ask, obviously, if we can possibly take a step back, because obviously I appreciate this is obviously a very important aspect of the application, but obviously there's a lot of conversation going into quite a lot of depth now about this one aspect of what is a wider application. So we thought it'd be a good idea if Sean got the opportunity just to, should we explain it in the context of the wider application and what it actually means in terms of the decision tonight?
Thank you. Yes, this application will be determined by yourselves as the planning committee. It's not the local planning authority's responsibility to determine the education strategy for Hitchin. We are dealing with the application for planning permission and looking at it as a whole. And as part of the Section 106 provisions, the applicant has agreed to pay the appropriate amount, the appropriate contribution towards education, both primary and secondary. And that's as far as we can go as a planning authority, to make sure that the applicant has paid sufficient amounts to mitigate the impact of the development. It is then for the education authority to determine how to spend those monies in order to address the educational demands generated by the development. We could not, for example, refuse planning permission on the basis that we don't agree with the educating authority's strategy for Hitchin. That would not be sustainable on appeal at all. If the applicant was refusing to make sufficient contributions to mitigate the impact of the development, then that would be a reasonable basis for refusing planning permission, but they're not. They have agreed to make the contribution that has been asked of them, and that is as far as that matter can go. And there is no basis for members to refuse planning permission based upon not agreeing, for example, with the Education Authority's strategy for delivering education in Hitchin. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I'll throw it open now for debate to members.
Right.
Sorry, Alhamdulillah, if you'd like to.
Yes, sure. Sorry, so I just wanted to clarify with Councillor Muir, just before we go into debate. Yes, sorry, I just want to clarify. Can I just confirm I understood correctly that you're part of the Education Committee for Hertfordshire County Council?
Yes, I was appointed to the Education Committee last May.
Okay, and have you exercised, in your capacity, have you been part of any decision making regarding this application or where the contribution's going towards which school?
No, it's never come to the education panel, and I haven't missed any, and it definitely hasn't come. It's been done by officers.
Okay, because you don't have an interest, I do believe you can actually speak from what you wanted to. I understand you wanted to speak earlier.
Yes, I did. I wanted to ask the county officer some questions.
Yeah, in that case, you can speak because you don't have a declarable interest in this as such.
Fine, thank you.
Why did the questions you're going to ask haven't already been asked? Is Anthony still available?
Fine.
Yep, I'm still here.
Anthony, we've heard from the parish councillor that there's 260 houses in the local plan to be built around St Edlitz. That means to say it's over half a form entry. As you know, 500 houses is one form entry through the school. So it looks to me.
I'm sorry, Night, I am on mute. Was that okay?
Sorry, who said what?
Legal officers jumped in. Don't worry.
Continue. Continue.
Can I carry on? Thank you, Chair. So it looks to me that if those houses are built, it's over half a form entry of local children that will want to go to their local JMI school. All those youngsters, we've already heard from the parish councillor, there's extra children in the school already, that the education department has asked them to take extra. So with those extra as well, to take into account, it could move up to, you know, enough children for 3/4 of a form of entry. And all those children, if they're going to go to the new school, is over 2 miles. So they can all have free transport to the new school. Has that cost been taken into account of refusing to give St. Hippolyte's money for expansion? Those are my questions.
Yeah, I think to reiterate, we're not necessarily saying that those children are going to go to a school 2 miles away. So the cost of transport, I think is a bit of a moot point. I do completely take on board what you're saying in terms of approximately 260 houses equates to about half a form of entry. And as I was saying in my opening piece, my understanding is there's about 3 development sites that have come forward already, which have taken up over 2/3 of the capacity of this proposed expansion already. So if and when the rest of that development comes forward, there's not going to be enough space in St. Hippolyte's anyway. It would appear to be. There might then be the argument that, well, how close is the nearest school that has capacity over the border as such? So adding the capacity from this development to it kind of, I guess, exacerbates that problem, particularly given that this development is, sorry to reiterate it, within the Hitchin primary planning area. Any other development sites in St. Hippolyte's, I believe, will not be, and therefore almost have that better case about being and going to the St. Hippolyte's primary school and the expansion project. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor. Right, gentlemen and ladies. I did say ladies. Open for debate. Would anybody like to say anything? Councillor David Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick off. Overall, I think I echo the views of the parish council that this is a good development, provides lots of extras, lots of benefits. Overall, I think it's a good development and can be commended for such. I do have concerns over these education issues. The officer says that it's not this committee's place to determine policy, though, for the Education Authority. However, it is this committee's place under the NPPF to ensure that it does the development provides sufficient educational needs. Whether that policy does it or not is indifferent. I can take the point from the Arts County Council officer that St. Hippolyte's isn't in the Hitchin PPA. This development is, but it's a damn sight closer to St. Hippolyte's than anywhere else, to be perfectly honest. And I think to say, well, it's 10 metres over the line, which it's not that far off, actually. The far side of that field's about 10 metres from the St. Hippolyte's boundary, looking at the map there. to say that it can't affect St Iplit's Primary School because it's in Hitchin PPA is frankly quite strange. I have looked at those figures he was talking about while we've been talking there. And yes, all the schools in Hitchin, apart from one, do show surplus capacity up until 2026. So I accept that there is other places that they could go, particularly if the Highover Farm comes in and mitigates some of that. However, none of those schools are very close to this development. Every single one of them involves crossing a main road, a major road. Most of them involve travel through the pollution area at the Three Moorhens, which is a concern, which County Council themselves have great concerns over, the amount of traffic and the amount of things going through there. And they did even mention that in relation to education at the local plan hearings many, many, many years ago, it seems to be now. And the education people did raise that point over another school about why it couldn't be there. It has to be here because to avoid travel through that area. However, all that said, I can't see any reason, sound reason, that we get to refuse it on the educational grounds. However, we can't, I don't believe legally we can actually put a condition in about the education must go to St Iplit's or must be a contribution to it. It would be nicer if that had been contribution had been left to the Hitchin PPA. Then that would let some of the closer schools have a bit of money. That would help. However, this is one of the reasons as well that education provision is part of the thing why it's exceptional circumstances development of the Greenbelt. I think it's one of the reasons that the applicant used. I'm just wondering, Chair, if we can add an informative comment or a recommendation to when this does go to the Secretary of State, that the committee has great concerns, if others agree with me, that about the provision of education under the NPPF doesn't appear to be satisfied, and we would kindly ask County to consider this again. I don't know if we can do anything along those lines, if somebody could sum up with a better idea on that one, Chair.
Mantle.
I think that I totally agree, by the way, that this is an acceptable application, and the past track record of appeals would suggest that the inspectorate would totally support that. Therefore, I would be happy to propose that it be sent to the Secretary of State, or we are minded to approve it, subject to the Secretary of State not calling it in. I think that's the correct terminology. But on the education one, that really does bother me. I think we should be making it quite clear that we expect education to be provided with this in association with developments, and not requiring car driving, and that education should be provided sufficiently close that children, certainly primary children, should be able to walk or cycle or get to school without creating more carbon emissions, more driving, more traffic, or anything of the kind. And I would agree that we should put this as a comment to the County Council Education Department, so that they're strange, I find quite difficult to understand logic of looking at much larger areas. In reality, we're talking about parents living in homes and expecting to be able to get their children to school in a reasonable way, and to the same school that their friends and neighbours go to. And I think it would be not inappropriate to make these points strongly to the County Council, that we suggest that in this case, the provision of education in St Iplit's is actually a very important element in this application and the other applications which we'll be getting in the parish of St Iplit's.
Councillor Tyson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I totally agree with Councillor Mantle there, and I feel very supportive of this application. Obviously, with that caveat about the Section 106 money, I think it's very unfortunate, and we don't want to go over it all again. I think that Parish Councillor Moore was very eloquent in his explanation of how it feels from the perspective of the St Hippolyte's School to see that money going into Hitchin. And I have to say I'm sceptical about the cascade effect that will take pupils to a school on the other side of Hitchin, thus freeing up places in St Hippolyte's School for the children of the new development in St Hippolyte's. And obviously, you know, you have to ask why it is that the catchment area, the primary area boundary can't be adjusted to allow that new development to actually be in the St Hippolyte's area where it rightfully appears to belong. So in any case, I do also concur that if there's a way of finding some wording that we can recommend that county review this and see if there's something more that can be done to support the pupils at St Hippolyte's, that would be my recommendation.
Councillor Tony Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. Obviously, we're not the experts when it comes to education. We have to be led by the local authority accordingly. And I can see why they're doing it, and I understand why they're doing it. And the equations that they have to work to are laid down by government and planning law. The thing is, though, I understand the concerns, and I just can't find it in this paperwork. It must be in something else I read. There is a scheme already in the system to actually expand St Hippolyte's School. Now, I know I've read that in there somewhere, and as far as monies are concerned, whether it be 106 or others, you could put an informative in there, but it's very obvious to the committee that St Hippolyte's School is actually working at the moment above its normal numbers. I think it was 176 that got mentioned instead of 140 something. That's a lot of children. Now, it might not be that they're all coming from St Hippolyte's, because a lot of parents find a good school and they do everything in their power to get their child in there. But it's obvious that they do need some help, and obviously help sooner than later. So could we put an informative in the actual thing to actually ask the County Council Education Authority to actually look at St Hippolyte's and see if they can find a way of aiding and assisting?
Sean, you've heard what the members have said and what the feelings are. Is there some way that you can add an informative?
We can certainly write to the County Council Education Authority and ask them to look at this matter further with regards to the contributions that the development is making. The application is addressing its requirements by making the required financial contributions, and obviously it's then for the Education Authority to determine how to spend it. But we can ask the County Council to consider the concerns raised by members and by St Hippolyte's Parish Council, but we could not, for example, refuse planning permission because we disagree with the Education Authority. We could refuse planning permission, as I said earlier, if the applicant was not making sufficient provision, financial contribution, but they are, and therefore there's no basis for resisting the proposed housing development. It was mentioned earlier that there was some allocations for housing in St Hippolyte's. The emerging local plan indicates that 34 dwellings have already been approved, and that there's 52 houses allocated in the parish, which may well contribute towards expansion at St Hippolyte's School. There is a reference in my report at paragraph 5.4.106 to the County Council's response to concerns raised regarding the strategy. And that does confirm that there is already a proposed project to expand St Hippolyte School to 0.3 FE expansion. Any further expansion, there's insufficient land to do so. And as Anthony from County Council said earlier, if this scheme were to contribute to St Hippolyte's, though there would be no capacity left for any further contributions from those housing developments that may well be closer to that school and further away from Hitchin. So that is a relevant consideration as well. Thank you, Chair.
Are members happy with Sean actually approaching HCC? Yeah. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. With that in mind, that we have that sort of informative in there, I'd happily to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Ian. Right. We have a proposer and we have a seconder. So, Will, can we go to the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. That motion is carried.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the speakers. I'd like to thank Anthony, if he's still there in the background as well, for being with us this evening. Thank you, Anthony. It's approaching 9:10, so I'm going to take a 5-minute break here before we move on to item 6.
Okay, Darryl, can we take down the hold notice, please?
Right, welcome back. Item 6 is land east of Picknage Road and adjacent to 36 Picknage Road, Barley, Hertfordshire. Anne MacDonald to present.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone. There's one update which has been tabled. I hope you've all seen it. It's a rather lengthy update. In summary, this issue is regarding the fact that the consultation response from the HCC Growth Infrastructure Unit, which was dated November 2021, was actually not received by the Planning Department, and this came to light today. This response was seeking contributions towards education, library and youth services. Due to this scheme being less than 20 housing units, the contributions should be obtained via a unilateral undertaking, not via Section 106 agreement. This application does actually have a signed and completed unilateral undertaking as set out in the report, but that unilateral undertaking only states that it's not more than 4 dwellings would be occupied prior to the completion of the build part of the shop, and does obviously not include the contributions, as I was not aware of them, and the application anyway has been recommended for refusal. As a result of this, a second reason for refusal has been tabled tonight, which is stating that the application is lacking a unilateral undertaking. So that's a brief summary of what was tabled to you earlier. Can we have the first slide, please? Thank you. Oh, the next slide, please. This is obviously the map showing the site location. The site is actually on land outside of the village boundary, in an area classed as rural area beyond the green belt. The very slight hatched area, if you can just make it out, sort of in the sort of southwest of the blue line, is actually land in the conservation area, and the rest of the land is outside of the conservation area, and obviously the whole site is in the rural area beyond the green belt. This application is a permission in principle application for a new shop and 9 houses. A permission in principle application is a simplified application process where the first stage is limited to locations, land use, and the amount of development, with all other matters considered in the second technical stage. Next slide, please. This is a visual of the site. This shows the fence line on the left-hand side of the picture is the side flank boundary of number 36. So this shows the location where the shop would be located. And it gives you an indication where you can just about see the land is dipping at that point. It starts to rise slightly to the right-hand side of the picture. And there's obviously, you can appreciate the clearness of the view out to the back and the openness of the landscape. Next slide, please. And this is looking sort of further down to the south. You can see the land is rising, and you can see there's a sort of tree line along the road on the southern part of the site. Next slide, please. This shows the indicative layout for the shop for the proposal, with the shop located on the north side and the houses extending down to the south. This application has been appealed, and therefore tonight the committee needs to resolve how you would determine the application in the event that we were still the determining authority. The application is recommended for refusal on the basis that there is an existing successful village shop in Barley. Planning policies do not support the provision of a new shop on land outside the village boundary when there's already a shop in the village. The 9 houses are to be stated to be enabling development to cover the build costs of the new shop. As there is no policy support for a new shop, there is no policy support for 9 new dwellings. The location of the shop is also considered to be objectionable, as there would be harm on the amenity of the neighbour number 36, from noise from delivery vehicles and from customers parking and leaving, doors slamming, engines revving, and so on. This application type does not allow for the consideration of opening hours, design, bulk, light spill, or other possible harmful effects, but as land use is allowed to be taken into account, the indicative location of the shop next to number 36 and the harm on the amenity issues is a valid concern. It is noted that the council is behind in its delivery of housing land, but this is not considered to result in a split decision supporting the delivery of housing in the part of the site shown. This is due to the location of the shop on the north side, isolating the housing from the existing neighbouring development to the north, and thus resulting in objection to the proposed land use on this basis. The application is therefore recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Members, have you any questions for Anne? No, therefore, can I ask Jerry Carlisle to address the committee. Good evening, Jerry.
Good evening, Chairman. Thank you very much, and for allowing me to just say a few brief words. Essentially, what I wanted to do was really to reconfirm the Parish Council's unanimous objection to this application. A short summary of our objection is actually contained in the officer's report to you. I also wanted to confirm that nothing has occurred to change the Council's views regarding this application since our objection was submitted back in November 2021. We support the planning officer's recommendations for refusal, which largely echo those of the Parish Council, and I won't bother to read out the whole of our objections because they are summarised in the report to you. However, we should say that we, as a Parish Council, we do support the village shop. It is a highly valued village amenity, but that support cannot be given at any price, and particularly as represented by this application. Excuse me. We're also of the view that this application is potentially a Trojan horse because it is well known locally that the landowner wishes to see the whole of the area from the existing housing at the northern end of the site up to Picnic Corner developed. If the application were to be approved, it would be very difficult to resist development of the remainder of the site. Our objections to this application are also supported by the District Councillor, Gerald Morris, and also by our County Councillor, Fiona Hill, and I urge the committee to refuse this application as recommended by your officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, have you any questions for Jerry? Okay, can I therefore call upon Councillor Gerald Morris to address the committee?
Thank you, Chairman. Lots of Jerrys and Geralds here this evening for some reason. We're not related. I'm Gerald Morris, District Councillor, Ermine Ward, which includes the village of Barley, where this application is located. I'm speaking in support of the officer's recommendation to refuse this planning in principle application. I do not wish to repeat the points that have been made in the officer's report and by Barley Parish Council. The application is in part based on NHDC not having a 5-year land supply. As the committee will know, this is a device created by government to try and force councils to adopt a local plan as quickly as possible. Failure to do this attempts to penalise councils and the public by encouraging somewhat random house building. Whilst I do not have a problem in building much needed houses in appropriate locations, it should be remembered that this site was originally submitted during the early call for sites when the local plan was being prepared. At around 2016, the local plan officer concluded that this location was inappropriate and should not be included as a selected site. I'm afraid that this site was inappropriate for all the reasons that the officer originally concluded at that time, and I'm afraid that it's still inappropriate, as the officer explains in her report and recommendation before you. I do hope that the committee will support the officer's recommendation to refuse this PIP application. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald. Members, have you any questions for Gerald? No? Okay. Can I therefore invite John Ridge to address the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to thank you and your council for the opportunity to speak in support of this planning application. I speak not only for myself as a local resident for 46 years, but also for Barley and residents in surrounding villages and hamlets in favour of this application. It's clearly understood by all that this application for 9 houses is to financially support the provision of a viable village shop and post office. The two are inexorably linked. This application therefore presents a golden opportunity to create a well-run and financially viable village store and post office with a significantly improved range of products and services in a sensible location to meet the needs of a local area. The issues associated with the existing shop Contrary to the officer's report to you, the existing shop is not successful and there is an urgent need for new premises. The current premises are in this day and age totally unfit for purpose. The building is listed, insurance and security are a major issue. There is no disabled access with two very narrow aisles. There is no rear access for delivery, so all deliveries are made through the entrance with subsequent parking and pavement issues when truck deliveries are made. There are no staff facilities and only one small toilet. There's no parking for staff or customers, results in on-street parking, congestion, and regular minor damage incident, which is a major issue for local residents and shop customers. Visitors and staff cars from the expanded care home opposite and drivers from the local bus company all park their cars day long in the vicinity, thus depriving the shop of adequate and safe parking. In short, the viability of the business in the current location is unsustainable and it cannot continue in its current form. There is a major impact of losing the village shop. Barley is fortunate to have a shop and post office, and its loss would have a major impact not only on Barley, but also the surrounding 8 or 9 villages who rely on it for the essential services and supplies it provides. In truth, its loss would be life-changing for residents and locals alike. There will be an immediate environmental income from the impact from the loss of the shop and post office, as the round trip from Barley to Tesco's in Royston is about 12 miles and more from other local villages who regularly use the shop and post office. A critical social impact would be the loss of its offering of essential supplies and services. With an ageing population and the closing of town bank branches only enhances the crucial need for a local post office. The post office is also essential for small local businesses who use the facility on a daily basis. The benefit of having a new shop, the current tenant would like to continue in the new premises with an enhanced shop offering of fresh foods, local produce, and a small coffee shop. The post office, with more space, would act as a hub for mail order deliveries and returns, and dedicated off-road parking for deliveries and customers. The need for 9 houses to fund the village shop, the new shop. 9 houses will not change the character of the village, but will assist keeping the school and other local businesses viable. The owners have signed a statutory declaration, which means that the new shop must be delivered before the 5th house can be occupied, thus ensuring its delivery. I support the enabling development of these 9 houses, as costings for the standalone shop are well in excess of £1 million. Should planning be granted, then after the planning and promotion costs and tax on the sale proceeds of the housing land, the net proceeds are budgeted to only just cover the shop construction costs, with its infrastructure. The detailed issues will be controlled by the council through the subsequent approvals necessary. I must also highlight that this application is for planning in principle only, and the layout and siting of the shop that has been submitted is purely an indicative first idea. Should the site obtain planning permission in principle, then the details around the shop's location, housing layout can be agreed with the council and other stakeholders in due course.
You have 1 minute, John.
Therefore, any comments around the layout and impact on neighbours are premature at this stage. It is sad that there is an evident inherent negativity in that objectors all see the crucial need to retain a shop and post office, but make no proposals for an alternative site with provision of housing to finance the capital cost of the shop and post office premises. In conclusion, I would urge the council to look favourably on this application, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, John. Members, have you any questions for clarification for John? Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, just a quickie one. Thank you for that information. The post office that within the store, is it a LPO licensed post office that receives the funding from the post office in that way? And if so, have the post office counters raised any concerns with the situation of the post office?
Not that I can report, but I can find out and report back if you want me to. I mean, all I know is that there are major security issues, and that's reflected in the insurance issues that they have. And the post office would obviously like to see it in a more safe and substantial building. Being listed, they can't just put shutters up and do the necessary alterations to meet their requirement. Does that help?
sort of. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Mantle.
Did I understand correct that if this application is refused, the shop will close in any event?
There's every possibility that that will be the case because it's not financially viable.
Okay. Have you anything to add, Anne?
No, I mean the information put forward in the application was a sort of desire for a better range and a greater range of products and longer opening hours. There wasn't specifically stated in the application that the shop is on the brink of closure, and the application has not been considered on that basis. That said, the policy requirement at the current time does not allow for there is policy support to provide a village shop in locations where there aren't shops within the existing village, providing there's sort of surveys done to set out the sort of local needs and requirements. The situation at the moment in Barley is we're not in that situation. We know there is an existing shop in the village that's open and functioning. I hear what the agent has said, but there's not policy support to allow us sort of, if you don't do this, this might then be closed situation. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, members, do you wish to debate this? Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. Shop or no shop, the simple facts are that as far as planning is concerned, this is outside the village setting and it contravenes the emerging local policies and everything else. We could go down the route as a local authority of granting planning on all sorts of land outside of boundaries to support the financial requirements of anything from a supermarket to a riding stable. That's not what we're here for. Regrettably, we're in a situation that we have to look at planning law. And I would say the officer has summed it up quite clearly and succinctly, and I'll move her recommendation to refuse.
Thank you. So I have a proposer. Nobody else wants to say anything. Do I get a seconder then, please? Councillor David Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. Just echoing Councillor Hunter's words there. Happy to second the recommendation. Shop or not, post office or not, it's not within what we should be doing. It's not within what should be doing in a village. It's actually, when you look at the aerial map, it actually fills in like a whole third side and makes a whole big extension to the village and sort of closes a big loop. So happy to support the recommendation to refuse and second that, Chair.
We have a proposer and a seconder. Will you take the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. That motion's carried.
All right, we move on to item 7. It's the former Westerns car site and land adjoining 114 to 142 Cambridge Road, Hitchin. Tom Ray to present.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some a number of matters to update the committee with regard to this application. The first matter is that, as alluded to in the report, the applicant has now confirmed their agreement to pay the council £100,000 as a financial contribution in lieu of affordable housing provision on the site. Secondly, Chair, there are some revisions to the section 106 table in the report. At paragraph 4.76 in the agenda, there is a contribution that's missing that was originally requested by the County Council, and this is the sum of £10,296 plus indexation towards special education needs and disabilities. The applicant has been made aware of this error and accepts the contribution as part of the Section 106 agreement. Thirdly, Chair, I have been asked to convey to members a message from the applicant querying the conclusions in the report on viability. And this relates to the commentary at paragraphs 4.60 to 4.63 of the agenda report, as not including the revised comments of the Council's viability consultants, Dixon Searle Partnership, in response to additional information that the applicants submitted to the Council. I would advise members that this query is justified, as the revised comments of the consultants do state that they accept the overall conclusion that the scheme will not support a contribution to affordable housing. The applicants would like to reiterate to the committee that the Council's advisors accept that the scheme cannot support affordable housing because of the high existing land use value of the site and the well-publicised increase in build costs following Brexit and COVID. The applicant would also point out that the viability of the scheme has been further weakened by the revisions to the scheme, which include a reduction in overall unit numbers and the introduction of 4 houses, which, according to the applicant, achieve lower values on a pound to square foot basis than flats. In addition, the rising Section 106 costs have further reduced viability. These factors have occurred since the scheme was originally assessed by the Council's viability advisors. Notwithstanding all of these factors, the applicant has confirmed without prejudice a financial contribution of £100,000 towards affordable housing provision off-site. Finally, Chair, by way of updating, following further discussions with local residents, the applicant has suggested an additional planning condition to secure details of boundary treatments. Whilst there is a landscaping condition at condition 7 on the agenda, I would have no objection to this additional condition being opposed should members agree to it. And the suggested wording is, prior to the commencement of the development hereby permitted, full details of all boundary treatment throughout the development shall be submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. The development shall be carried out in accordance with the approved details. So if I can now proceed to the slides, Chairman. The first slide shows the application site, which is between Cambridge Road and Hamden Road. It boundaries the recently completed Allwoods Place development to the west, which comprises a number of flats and houses, and the traditional 2-storey housing to the east along Hamden Road. Approximately 2/3 of the site currently contains the former garage buildings, whilst the rest is hard surfaced. The site is just under ½ a hectare. Next slide, please. This is a photograph of the Hamden Road frontage, just outside the proposed access to the site. The site has an existing vehicular access onto Hamden Road as part of its commercial use. That access will be slightly realigned to serve the new residential development. Next slide, please. This slide shows part of the Allwoods Place development immediately adjacent to the site. These are some of the 3-storey townhouses that form part of a mixed development of 75 flats and 10 houses within that development. Next slide, please. This photograph is taken from within the site, looking towards the rear of the 3-storey shopping parade located along Cambridge Road. Next slide, please. This slide shows the layout of the development, which includes 3 apartment blocks and a terrace of houses along the Hamden Road frontage. Access is from Hamden Road and, well, vehicular access is from Hamden Road, and a pedestrian access is also shown from Cambridge Road between the Block D and number 148 on the northern part of the site as shown there. The apartment blocks are limited to 3 stories each, and the houses along Hamden Road are 2-storey. The buildings within the site are set away from the eastern boundary with the access road and a landscape strip providing a buffer to houses to the east along Hamden Road. The flat roof blocks B and C are located within the centre of the site behind the frontage buildings and therefore have limited impact on the street scene at either end of the site. Overall, the site coverage of the buildings is similar to the existing, but with significantly more green space within the site. 44 car parking spaces are proposed, which is equivalent to a ratio of around 1.5 spaces per unit, which is considered acceptable in this accessible location, which is close to public transport, shops, schools, and public open space. Next slide, please. This slide shows how the development fits in with the existing street scene along Cambridge Road and Hamden Road. On Cambridge Road, Block D, which is the lower part of that slide that you can see there, has a slightly lower ridge height than the existing parade of shops to the right, and then steps down in height towards the eastern boundary with the residential property at number 148, which is to the left there. On the Hamden Road frontage, which is the part of the slide to the top, the proposed houses here are of a similar scale and depth as the existing houses along that road, and are in fact lower than the townhouses in Allwoods Place to the west, which are just shown outlined to the immediate left of those four houses. Next slide, please. This slide is of the elevations and general appearance of Block C within the centre of the site. This block would have a maximum height of 8.5 metres. Next slide, please. This is of Block B, similar elevations and appearance to Block C, and is also 8.5 metres maximum height. A buff-coloured brick similar to Allwoods Place development is also proposed for both this block and Block C. Next slide, please. This slide shows more detail of the terrace of 4 houses along Hamden Road. Each of these dwellings accommodates 3 bedrooms and has approximately 9-metre deep rear gardens each. And each house has 2 allocated parking spaces. Next slide, please. This is the ground floor of Block B within the centre of the site. This particular block has 9 apartments within it. Next slide, please. This is the ground floor to Block C. This has 6 flats within it. And next slide, please. And finally, this is the ground floor to Block D. This block contains 9 flats. Next slide, please. This is the computer-generated image of Block D as it would appear along the Cambridge Road frontage. The block would have a similar fenestration and roof to the existing shopping parade, which is to the right in that image, and will be constructed in brick and render to reflect surrounding external materials. The frontage will also be landscaped with lawns and hedgerow, as seen on that image, which would be an improvement on the existing hard surface frontage to the car garage. Next slide, please. And this is the CGI image of the proposed houses along Hamden Road. The design has some modern and some traditional elevational treatments to it to reflect the surroundings. Also, there's a landscape frontage here with hedgerow and trees along the site frontage, with only 2 parking spaces serving one of the dwellings here. So in summary, Chairman, this proposed development makes an efficient use of a previously developed site in a very sustainable location. The density, scale and appearance of the development is appropriate, having regard to the surroundings and particularly the Allwoods Place development. It would also deliver a mix of small units of starter flats and family accommodation, which will assist the council in meeting its housing targets. Negotiations have led to improvements to the scheme in terms of design and the mix of housing. The impact of the development on local infrastructure is offset by a fairly comprehensive package of 106 measures that includes a substantial sum towards the Hitchin rail station secondary access project, and also a significant sum that can be used towards affordable housing in the district. The concerns of neighbours have been taken into account through revisions to the scheme, and there are no objections by the Highway Authority. In these circumstances, Chair, where there are limited adverse impact, which are substantially outweighed by the benefits of the scheme, I would ask that members support the scheme as set out in the recommendation. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Members, have you any questions of Tom? Councillor Mantle.
Thank you. In general principles, I'm happy about this development, but I've got some specific questions. Are you proposing to remove permitted development rights from the houses?
Yes, that is.
Yeah, I couldn't find it. I thought you must be.
It's in one of the conditions,
yeah.
Councillor Manson.
And the other one is, what provision is there for storage of bicycles, rubbish bins, etc., and particularly mobility scooters, things like that?
Yeah. If we could go back to the site layout slide, not sure whether that's possible. The coloured site layout slide. There are dedicated bin stores for Block D and the cycle store. So that Block D is the one to the north there. That has it. Cambridge Road frontage. Yeah, that has a bin store and a cycle store along the left-hand side of it as you look at it. Block C has a cycle store towards the very left-hand corner where that sort of dog leg is. There's a bin store, a cycle store there, which is shared with Block B, and both Block C and Block B have their own bin storage areas, covered bin storage areas. There is no specific provision for mobility scooters, but I mean, if members are minded to follow that up, that could be a condition.
Didn't mention the houses, bin storage for the houses.
Yeah, again, on that plan, the bin storage areas, you see there's a sort of the back of those houses, there's a sheds there for each of the units, or side access for at least 2 of those units could accommodate bins.
As suggested then, could we add a condition if this is approved for mobility scooters?
Chairman, shall I suggest some wording or?
Yes, please.
We could say something like, prior to the commencement of the development, details of mobility scooter storage provision shall be submitted to and approved by the local planning authority, and the development carried out in accordance with those approved details.
I think that's exactly what you wanted to say. Okay. Councillor Muir.
Thank you. On that ground slide, is there enough room for one of our dust carts to get up there and turn round and come out to Hampton Road, driving?
Through you, Chair, yes, the main access road includes a turning head in the centre of the site, which is sufficient for a refuse collection vehicle to enter the site and leave in forward gear. The Highway Authority are happy with the refuse collection arrangements.
Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could you just confirm for me, on the site plan, the red line bit, there's a big row of trees at the back of the shops and that at the moment. Are they outside the red line?
I think part of that vegetation is sort of grown up over the last 5 years since the building has been unoccupied and site vacant. I'm not sure whether some of it does fall outside the red line. I couldn't confirm that, Councillor. Although there is a landscaping scheme, condition.
Okay, can I invite Dan Burden and John Skur to address the committee?
Thank you very much. So I live opposite the proposed entrance to the development. I'm also representing the residents of Hamden Road. Please don't make a confusion with the fact that this might be a Cambridge Road development. All of the traffic will be coming onto the residential road of Hamden. No traffic will be going onto the main thoroughfare of Cambridge. So we were very impressed by the CGI picture that we've just seen. I was particularly impressed that there are actually no CGI representations of vehicles parked on either side of the car, either side of the road. Since the old college site has been redeveloped into Allwoods Place, that end of Hamden Road has essentially become a car park. Both sides of the road have cars parked all along them. It's basically rendered a single carriageway at that end of the road. It's dangerous to cross, and with young children and disabled people such as myself. Hamden's already a rat run for people trying to avoid Cambridge Road during the rush hour. And we believe this is going to be exacerbated by traffic and parking from the new development. Para 4.54 in the reports that you've seen from the officer states that the Trick software has predicted 20 additional cars in the morning rush hour. I reject that. I don't know how Trix does its calculations, but we're looking here at a development of 28 residences, all the majority 2-bed flats, which are obviously geared towards young professionals. I think we will be seeing 2 vehicles per flat. I find it very hard to believe that there will be less than 1 vehicle per flat coming out of the development in rush hour. In terms of access, once again, Para 4.34 claims that it's an existing primary entry point to the garage. That is incorrect. It was the egress point from the garage. The access point was from Cambridge Road. I'm at 2 minutes. I'm going to crack on. Also, it is untrue to say that it's the original access point. It has been extended by about 1 car length, making it opposite our drive, meaning that should I wish to reverse out of my drive, I'll be reversing into 3-way traffic, new traffic coming towards me from the left, from the right, between parked cars, and that does not feel safe.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, councillors and chair, for the time to speak here. I live at 81 Allwoods Place, which is right on the end house of the Allwoods Place development. It'll be right next to Block B, and Block C is just behind our garden. I'm here to summarise some of the objections raised by the Allwoods Place residents and the Cambridge Road residents. Those are primarily 3. We think this represents an overdevelopment of the site and the wrong housing mix. We don't think 1 and 2-bed flats are what's needed in the local area or market demand. And we think 2 or 3-bed small houses for young families, just like has been proposed for Block A, is what is required. We're not clear that the flooding risk objection that was raised by the lead local flood authority has been addressed. We know the developer has put forward its own assessment, but that doesn't appear to have been formally accepted. I don't know how permission can be granted until that objection is addressed and lifted. And obviously local residents will fairly look to be made whole if permission is given, and then without that objection being lifted, and then there is resultant flooding that damages property. Finally, the main objection is overlooking and loss of property, cramming 4 separate development blocks, acknowledging that one of them is now housing into this site would inevitably lead to them being overlooked from all sides and feeling encircled, and also the locations of blocks B and C in particular will also overlook and affect light for both Allwoods Place and Cambridge Road residents. In particular, there's very close proximity to Block B to our own house. It's only 4.5 metres away at the side, and it's just beyond the end of our garden. The planning report concedes there'll be some loss from block B, but it says it's only minor, but I'm not sure that's based on, because the height is significantly higher than the current western building, and the loss of light for 82 to 84 is also acknowledged. There's been some attempt to limit the overlooking issue through orientation of the blocks and by obscuring some of the windows in block C looking directly. But I still see that as a fundamental issue all around the site, particularly where there are balconies you're looking to people's gardens, and there's a loss of privacy there. I don't understand why those blocks have to be 3 stories, or why why block A was changed to housing, because there was a concern it was too close behind 82 to 85 Orwards Place, but the same hasn't been applied for block C behind 79 to 81 Orwards Place. It seems arbitrary and inconsistent. And there's also concern about the impact of lighting that will be in the car parking area, flood lighting, etc., which is very close to the housing.
I was just being kind. Thank you, gentlemen. Members, have you any questions for Dan and John? No? Okay then. Can I invite Councillor Elizabeth Dennis-Harburg, Member Advocate, to address the committee?
There we go. Thank you very much, Chair. Now, just to be clear, I've been working with and supporting the residents adjacent to this development for about a year now, I think. And within the last 14 days was the first time that we've had positive engagement from the developer at this site. On the 26th of January this year, the lead local flood authority sent through a very clear and very strong objection to this site proceeding. It set out that there is no acceptable flood risk assessment or surface water drainage assessment in place, and therefore this submission is non-compliant. There's no site-specific modelling, generic modelling has been relied upon. There is actually at this location, as anybody who has spent time in the Cambridge Road, William Road, Hampden Road area of Hitchin know, significant flooding already. Residents at 148 and 150 Cambridge Road have previously had difficulties with flooding at their properties and have been informed that the existing infrastructure in place is not sufficient to tolerate any further build. And in fact, this report would confirm their anecdotal reports on that matter. If there is a 1 in 30 year rain event, it will flood at this site. If there is a 1 in 100 year rain event due to climate change, it will flood at this site. We are seeing more of these events, and they are coming much more frequently than the 1 in 30 and 1 in 100 years. There's much more to do, I think, and on behalf of and as highlighted by the lead local flood authority, to make this site compliant and to ensure the safety and mitigate the risk, not just of the new residents who will live here, but also of the existing community around this site. There's no dry, safe pedestrian access, for example, or egress from the site should there be a flood. The flood walls are not acceptable according to the flood authority. The proposed mitigation in the flood zone isn't adequate. The gravity sewer viability at this time is unknown. And there's a query as to whether any revised flood risk assessment and surface water drainage assessment has been submitted. These are notes that I received yesterday and today from the lead local flood authority. So it's concerning that if there have been updates, they haven't been properly consulted with. Now, if there are updates that haven't been seen by the flood authority, I would perhaps suggest that the committee might wish to consider amending a condition to this application, something along the lines of that prior to development commencing, the developer must satisfy the lead local flood authority's concerns as set out in its report and any ongoing communication. Now, some of the points that we weren't able to cover off earlier are there are a couple of areas that residents would like to ensure there's ongoing discussion around. So, for example, if the permission is granted, the residents really want the developers to be held to account on some of the points that came out in the meeting that they had with them last night, which I think the developers will be aware of and made notes of. But for the record, I will try and rattle through these as quick as I can, and I can absolutely forward them on in writing. These include the entryways to both Cambridge Road and Hampden Road and the pedestrian and vehicle access across the site are maintained. The immediate neighbours on Cambridge Road are rightly concerned that any gate or similar attached to their boundary could lead to noise from the gate opening and closing, and also people gathering there, encouraging antisocial behaviour. The concerns from Hamden Road residents have been made clear, and obviously the headlights from any cars exiting onto Hamden Road could potentially shine directly into the front window of existing neighbours' properties. So we ought to perhaps maybe bear some of that in mind when we're thinking about angling that, please, developer. The location and switch on times for any floodlights and other lighting, again, can cause nuisance and disruption to the existing community in this location. So we need to think carefully about any lighting in the car parks. How will the demolition be handled safely given the presence of some asbestos? So I think that that's an ongoing concern that the developers are considering. I'm aware that pilings have been considered within the context of the report, and this authority strongly advises against the use of those in the construction technique, given the proximity to existing homes. That's a key concern, especially of the Cambridge Road residents. And I'd like to reiterate here that we need to make sure that that is followed and complied with. Keeping the green roofs on blocks B and C and other significant landscaping to increase the appeal and biodiversity, given the overlooking issue, I think that's entirely laudable, and I'd like to ensure that that does proceed. And we need to make sure that there's no negative impact on the substation from the development, given that proximity to both Allwoods Place and the new buildings. And the residents expect the developer to conduct electromagnetic field surveys before, during and after construction to reassure the residents already in situ that there are no negative consequences from their work. So in summary, we have grave concerns over the flood report. And please, 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 developer, be a good neighbour to the community that's already here.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Members, have you any questions for Elizabeth? Therefore, can I ask Matt? Oh, you're a bit late, Tom.
Sorry. Elizabeth, I just got one request, actually. That was a very condensed 5 minutes. Could you just repeat the part about the note that you got from the Flood Authority? What that contained?
Absolutely. So I was speaking to residents over the bank holiday about their concerns, and the resident at 150 Cambridge Road was very clear that in the past, the lead local flood authority has been against developments in this area. There have been historic issues with drainage there. I know from personal experience walking and taking children to school in that area that it floods at the slightest drop of rain, no matter what the county council does. So it's essential that we look after the drainage and make sure that it is adequate and sufficient to tolerate any new build. Bearing that in mind, I emailed the lead local flood authority, which is Herts County Council, on bank holiday Monday. And yesterday I received a note from the officers, which I didn't read out, but I will now. It says, I've had a look into your query regarding the planning application for Weston's Garage, Cambridge Road, Hitchin. I could see from the documents supporting the planning application found on the North Herts Planning Portal that the lead local flood authority has responded with updated comments on the 26th of January 2022, which is the report I referred to, regarding the application and proposed measures. They have stated, in the absence of an acceptable FRA, flood risk assessment, and surface water drainage assessment, we object to the grant of planning permission. We object to the grant of planning permission and recommend refusal on the basis, and they've continued with the reasons, which are about 5 to 6 pages in correspondence length.
Can I invite Matt Corcoran to address the committee?
Thank you, Chair. Just checking the microphones working. Yep. Chair, members of the Planning Committee, thank you for this opportunity to address you all this evening. These proposals are a culmination of an extensive amount of hard work from your professional officers and our design team. We've worked positively with your officers over the last couple of years, prior to and during the planning application, seeking to deliver a high quality collection of new homes within a landscape setting. Joint applicants are the landowner and a selected housing partner in Land Homes, a specialist brownfield developer dedicated to achieving excellence in sustainability, high quality design and energy efficient developments. The application site is a sustainable brownfield location, which has fallen vacant over the last 4 years, and we therefore believe that these carefully considered proposals would make a positive and efficient use of land. We submitted the planning application around about a year ago and have since been working closely with your officers to evolve the proposals. Following extensive dialogue, a number of key changes have been made, reducing the number of homes, increasing the amount of landscaping and replacing the apartment block with 4 much needed family houses. The proposals include a significant array of public realm enhancements, particularly to improving the Cambridge Road frontage. This will support and enhance the vitality and viability for local businesses in this parade, as well as providing additional residents to use their services. The site is at present all hard surfaced and includes unsightly, vacant industrial-sized buildings with unrestricted commercial use we consider not appropriate for such a residential location. The proposals provide a collection of Muse-style buildings nestled amongst significant new green infrastructure and includes a biodiversity net gain, along with 24 new mature and semi-mature trees, hedgerows with a central landscaped lawn. We have provided an acceptable level of car parking. Each family home has 2 car parking spaces with visitors and car parking carefully situated throughout. There are no objections from the Highway Authority on access and transport matters. As with all small brownfield sites, viability is challenging. We've been working very closely with Rupert to develop a scheme that delivers a suite of public benefits and is both high quality and can be delivered. In addition to the affordable housing contribution, which would equate to circa 4 homes, a full suite of policy level financial contributions have been agreed. These include approximately £200,000 towards local primary and secondary schools, nearly £50,000 towards the new Hitchin Station Eastern Access Project, contributions to youth services, Hitchin Library and Young People's Centre, £15,000 towards enhancing sports and play at Walsworth Common Play Area, and £10,000 towards the new East Severe Learning Difficulties School. All of these contributions are index linked. The proposals deliver much needed new housing on a vacant brownfield site in a sustainable location, and would also help the authority resist development pressures on more sensitive greenfield and greenbelt locations across the district. The plans include a palpable suite of public benefits, will improve the character and quality of the area, the street scene, whilst enhancing the vitality and viability of nearby businesses. I would just like to turn to a couple of questions that have come up from our fellow previous speakers. Thank you very much for those comments. Just to confirm, the applicants, the joint applicants, the landowner and the selected development partner are part of the considerate contractor scheme. So certainly resident engagement here on in throughout the last span of the project, should members choose to grant planning permission, will be continued. In terms of the Hamden Road frontage, highways do not object to the application, and we've worked with officers to provide car parking provision, which is actually greater than the levels of car parking provided at the recently built out scheme at Allwards Place. In terms of comments regarding the number of units, this site is actually a windfall site, which appears in the council's strategic housing land availability assessment. And the numbers we are proposing here are lower than the council's technical evidence base. If I could just talk a little bit more about our conversations and discussions with the local lead flood authority. We have been working incredibly hard and closely with council officers. The councillor has touched on a previous report dating back in January, but that report has actually been updated, and you will see that there's a surface water condition number 20. This is a similar type of condition that was used on the scheme at Allwards Place, obviously within the same location. I would like to point out that actually the site is not in a flood risk area, and Anglian Water have accepted a connection into the pipe network. I think that rattles it up and my time has just expired, so I would like to thank you all for listening to me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Members, have you any questions of clarification for Mr. Corcoran? Councillor Levitt.
Good evening. One of the previous speakers has raised the issues about transport impact and the effect of the additional traffic on the road network. Your TRIX data actually shows from your transport statement a reduction in impact because it was you based it on when it was a garage and you based it on industry standards. And it does list the current transport conditions and that. However, what it doesn't appear to take into account is the adjacent development on a former North Hearts College site that's come into use recently and developed a significant amount of extra traffic. Because your statement's actually dated May 2021, before that development came into use. Has any further assessment been done on the additional impact now caused by that development, and looking at that data again to see its effects?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the question. To respond to that, yes, we have assessed the site in terms of what the site would be generating in terms of and how it's modelled with TRIX analysis as a commercial operation. But also following recent discussion or later discussions with the council's highway officers, we have, and which has resulted in no objections from the county council highways team. There is considered to be no impact and no severe impact as defined in the MPPF in terms of impact on the local highway network in terms of pedestrian and vehicle safety. So we are particularly confident that the assessments are robust and that the scheme will not negatively impact the local road network.
Thank you. The question actually was, has the data from the new site and the additional traffic generation from that site been taken into account in those calculations?
I can confirm that, yes. Yeah, we've looked at that, and we've looked at the Always Place scheme, and that's been assessed, and the results of that do not change the consideration of the Highway Authority and our professional highway advisors. Thank you.
Can I call upon Tom Ray to respond to any of the points raised, particularly the point that's come up over flooding?
Thank you, Chairman. Just touching on what the speaker mentioned there, Matt Corcoran, the site is within flood zone 1, which is the lowest area likely to flood, according to the Environment Agency. But the key thing here is that there is going to be less hard surfacing throughout the site and more soft landscaping than the existing situation. And there's also a similar footprint to the existing buildings. But more importantly, we have reconsulted with the lead local flood authority following new advice received by the council on the 6th of April. And if members were minded to grant consent to this, it would just be a resolution. It wouldn't be granting planning permission. It would be subject to the objection from the flood authority being removed, and that's set out in the recommendation. In terms of pedestrian access, the site plan does show pedestrian access to the north onto Cambridge Road and obviously to the south through the existing shared surface onto Hamden Road. In terms of the lighting concerns raised by a resident, there is a condition number 21 on the recommendation to deal with any external lighting within the scheme that might be proposed, so the council can exercise control over any details of that scheme. There's also several conditions relating to construction and also informatives requiring the developer to carry out the construction phase in accordance with British standards. There's also a landscaping condition at condition 7, in addition to the boundary treatment boundary treatment condition, which I mentioned during the updating earlier on. I think that's covered most of the points, Chair. I think finally, there was a question of parking along Hamden Road, and members will see on page 84 of the agenda report, there will be a contribution of £4,000 towards a new traffic regulation order, which will consider whether any restrictions can be placed within that part of Hamden Road to control on-street parking. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Members, would you like to debate any points? Councillor Levitt.
I shall start again. Thank you, Chair. Actually, question for the officer. One of the things that was raised, not raised so much, one of the developers actually mentioned about, objectors mentioned about the access through the site used to be pretty much a one-way system in off Cambridge Road and back out through the back way into Hamden Road, which is pretty much, I can confirm that because I used to go to this site quite a lot when I was working in the motor trade a long time ago. But one thing that did trigger, and I see there's a condition on it, is about the contaminated land issues. That was they did have petrol pumps on the forecourt there a long time ago. There was big oil tanks and underground storage at the back. I see there is a condition on contaminated land, phase 2. Is just can you confirm that is the one that involves actually doing bores and surveys and test samples for proper surveys on that site?
Yes, Councillor Levitt, a phase 2 is a lot more intrusive survey. The phase 1 report has revealed that the site is contaminated, and the phase 2 will then go into in-depth and then have to be discharged by us eventually once the information is available.
Councillor Simon Blossom.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've looked at this and been right the way through this. And when you look at the recommendations, when you look at the planning considerations that have been put on, I think it covers the vast majority, if not all, of the issues that have been raised tonight. So I like the look of this. I like the look of the fact that we're using brownfield sites for this sort of work. This is what we are pushing for as a council. So I think that I would like to support this. I think I'm quite encouraged by the words of the planning officer regarding the flooding issue. And I think we've got some a bit of a resolution there, although there's something there to make sure that that is acceptable and looked after. So I'm quite happy to actually move this this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Muir?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Therefore, members, we can take this to the vote. Will?
Thank you, Chair. That motion is carried.
Thank you very much. I assume that includes the conditions reference to flooding.
2 conditions. One I mentioned at the beginning about boundary treatments, and the second one was regarding the mobility scooter provision.
Yeah. What about the LFA?
Put out in the recommendation, Chair, you'll see on page 85, permission be granted subject to the 106 agreement and the following conditions and the resolution of the objection raised by the lead local flood authority.
Thank you very much. Okay, we move on to 131 Eatnell Way, Letchworth Garden City, and to present.
Thank you, Chairman. This application is before you tonight, councillors, due to the applicant being a member of staff in the planning department. Otherwise, an application of this sort of small scale wouldn't normally come in front of you. And the proposal is for a single-storey rear extension, which is considered to be acceptable in both layout, scale, design, bulk, and external materials. I've got a few very quick slides to run through to show you the visuals. So, could I have the first slide, please? Next slide, please. So this is the bungalows as existing, all 4 elevations. Next slide, please. And this shows the existing layouts. The single story extension is basically to infill the slight sort of recess on the rear elevation there. Next slide, please. That shows the elevation as proposed. Next slide, please. And that shows the proposed floor layout plan. And the final slide shows photographic elevation. So the existing dwelling has got an existing rear projection already on the bottom left corner of the photograph. It's to infill out to the existing rear building line. And the neighbour on that side, on the left-hand side, has got an existing conservatory, so there won't be any harm on the next door neighbour. The application is considered to be acceptable in planning terms and is recommended for conditional permission. Thank you.
Any questions of the officer? Councillor Morgan Derbyshire.
I wasn't going to ask a question. I was going to propose we grant it as per officer's recommendation.
Right. We have a proposer, seconder. Councillor Simon Bloxham. Can we go to the vote, please? That's carried. Item 9, planning appeals. Tom to present.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware of the hour, so I'll be as brief as I can. You'll see in the agenda, there's 3 appeals that we've received when the agenda was written, which I'll just quickly report on. The first one's Nup End Farmhouse in Old Nebworth. This was originally refused by committee back in January 2021 in accordance with the officer recommendation. That appeal has actually been allowed. We refused it on harm to the Greenbelt or inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and an unsustainable location. In short, the inspector disagreed with both of those. They found that the site, whether you agree with this or not, the site constituted infill development within a village, i.e. within Old Nebworth. And they also considered that because of its proximity to existing dwellings and a bus stop within close proximity to the site, that it was a sustainable location. And the appeal was allowed. The second one on the agenda is at the Carriers Green End in Sandon. That application was to, that was a delegated refusal by officers. That was an application to convert an agricultural barn into a 3-bed dwelling. We refused it on grounds of harm to the setting of Grade 2 listed building and it being in an unsustainable location. Again, in short, the inspector basically agreed with both reasons for refusal and dismissed the appeal. Found harm to the Grade 2 listed carriers property, which the barn is in close proximity to, although for slightly different reasons. I think it was more related to driveways and paraphernalia, etc., rather than the actual conversion of the barn itself. And it was indeed in an unsustainable location where future occupiers would be pretty much solely reliant on the private vehicle. The third and final appeal, which I'm going to report back on, is at 8 Macefield Way in Royston. The application was basically in a sort of housing estate, was to change the use of a public bit of amenity space, green space, which formed part of the street scene, and to basically enclose it with a 2-meter high brick wall to form part of an enlarged garden. We refused it on the basis that it would be harmful to the street scene in the locality. And again, the inspector agreed with that reason and dismissed the appeal. That concludes the roundup of appeals. Thank you, Chair.
Are there any questions on any of the items? Therefore, the report. God, he's done it again.
So just before you close, not a question on that, but just to say from this is Mike Rice's last meeting as chairman of this committee. It's also his last meeting as a district councillor, as he's standing down in the May elections. And I think it's rather appropriate, considering the amount of work this Mike's done on his committee over the last year, that we say and record an appropriate thank you to him in the minutes of this meeting. Thank you, Mike, and I think we'll miss you next year. We'll try to miss you anyway.
Thank you.
Mike Hewson's last meeting, unfortunately, he was ill, couldn't be here.
Oh dear, he's not here, is he? Yeah. Yeah.